You no trouble. Me, fifth element. Supreme being. Me, protect you.
ID, please. And this is?
LEELOO Dallas Multipass.
LEELOO, multipass. You know this multipass. LEELOO Dallas, my wife. We're newlyweds.
Hello. Alright, so we're starting off with the multi-pass, which I cheated a little bit in creating by 3D printing the pieces for it. The back and front, and for lack of better words, the bulge, or like bulbous shape, and then the little stick that comes with it. After waiting basically an eternity for that, which is only a couple or a handful of minutes for you guys, I had it ready to peel off my board. This was my first time using my 3D printer, so I was a wee hesitant about actually peeling this off, but here we are. I didn't like the stick that it got printed off with. It felt a little bit flat, both in the actual shape and like metaphorically. It felt a little flat. So instead I took a plastic piece of a Q-tip and cut that down to size. And then painted it a matching yellow. As well as painting the quote-unquote lights their respective reds and whites. That rhymed. I added a thin layer of resin to seal them in, which wasn't necessary at this point, but I did it anyways. As well as the Q-tip. To put the back and front together to make it one cohesive piece, I'm using epoxy sculpt, basically an air dry clay that actually uses a 1-to-1 part A and B ratio to make a chemical compound that does act like air dry clay, like the way that you can manipulate it and use water as well to soften and sculpt the edges, but an epoxy in the way of the level of hard it actually dries down to. Being sure if you're using this, you are using proper PPE equipment, like gloves and a respirator in a well-ventilated area. This doesn't smell, but you don't want to mess with your lungs. Now grabbing my E6000, whatever is left of it, and adding big globs of that onto the inside of the structure so that the edges have durability with the epoxy sculpt, but the insides also stick together with the glue. Placing the top onto the bottom and then rolling out a snake of clay and flattening that out. Placing that all around the edges, being sure it's snug as a bug in a rug, or whatever that saying is. Using various tools along the edges to smush it in a little bit into the space between the two edges and overall smoothing it down. There's also this ventilating ridge, not for actual use, just for looks I suppose, that I needed the clay to come out of, so I used a tool for that. And then once everything was smoothed out, I went back in with a knife to once again clean up all of the edges. And once again do a final smooth. All of that work, and I almost forgot the most vital part. Well, maybe not the most vital, but almost forgot the Q-tip along the way though, which I just pushed into the tacky epoxy sculpt. Now, it wouldn't be a Sara video if I didn't have to test something out along the way and try a new technique or method for something to make things just a little bit harder on myself. This time around, it was using acrylic paint in resin, which this was actually my first time. I originally attempted to make a mold for this using the bulge, that I printed out, which didn't work out because of all the texture, and I won't waste your time with actually seeing that happen, so just take my word for it. But my second try was to actually partially fill up an Easter egg and let that sit with its butt down. I say butt because this one actually had a face. Let's see if round 2 worked. So, but it is. Using some plasticine clay to make sure the edges are airtight and then giving that overnight to cure. I mean, it worked better. Okay. That's so weird that adding acrylic paint to resin makes it so like this. I did clean up the edges with scissors as the egg have left some demarcation lines, and I had just used too much resin to the point where it wouldn't fit into the place that I needed it to. It's like a jelly. So that method worked. However, I did continue by taping off all of the parts I had previously painted and added resin to. And also any parts I didn't want the next round of paint to go on. Back and front. And then using a silver as hell spray paint. Here's some peel porn for you. The yellow bulge or bulb I had made again with less resin this time around and added tape to the bottom of the egg, like inside of it, to get rid of the texture that it previously had. And then when that was done curing, I simply cut it down to the size I needed and sanded it down to the height that I needed. And also to be sure to give it the bottom a little bit of added texture for this next step. But first, another thing I wanted to try. I didn't keep this in the final take, but I wish I had because it actually looked really cool and it was done with just some leftover plastic, which you know I had because I don't do any single-use plastic. I placed it over my piece and mapped out where to cut and then cut that out. And used a flat iron and a towel to heat press the open edges of the plastic down. I added some spray adhesive to the multi-pass and using a Tim Hortons card of all cards to flatten the back of the plastic down and keep it in place, cutting off the excess in the end. Then with some acetone and cotton swabs, I cleaned out the edges. And added another layer of resin all over the entire piece. as well as some into the hole which the bulb will be going into, and then adding more onto it and around it to secure it into place. My reason for not keeping the plastic on was because I could actually see the texture of the spray adhesive that it left behind, and the resin wouldn't keep it in place. But if you can think of a better way to adhere, please let me know. Moving on to I actually found this one, which was so close to LEELOO's, from a thrift store. I just knew that I would have to sculpt onto it and also remove the batteries, because at the time I thought this having to work was a lost cause because it wouldn't turn on. And as soon as I took the batteries out, I realized why. See that stuff falling out? That is battery acid. But I digress. Once again, as I said, I would need to sculpt onto it. So again, I put the 1-to-1 part of the 2-part epoxy together and started sculpting. It would be really hard to explain in words what this process actually looks like, because it's literally like a weird combination of me mixing weird shapes together to make more weird shapes, unnameable shapes even, and then pressing them firmly on and then blending them into the weapon. The biggest thing I can say to this is make sure that they are properly blended to the best of your abilities, and also make sure you aren't covering any lights or buttons. I am also using random household objects along the way for this, including a little gaming piece. Alright, so fun fact that I actually noticed yesterday while I was looking over all this is, if you guys remember, like 2 minutes ago in this video, I took the batteries out and it didn't work. But what I did not realize was I took 2 out of 3 out because there was like a battery acid crust right here, so this compartment wasn't coming down. So I took the 3rd battery out. We have a working gun, so it's a good thing I didn't cover up any of this. And a foam rod that you might curl your hair with. As well as drilling into said gaming piece to make a little hole for that rod. If there was a piece that needed structure to attach to it that wasn't already there, I would add the structure, allow time for that to cure down. And then add the piece on to make sure that everything was as structurally sound as possible. Once all of the additions were cured and dried, I taped everything off that I didn't want painted, including lights, and let's say the trigger, the batteries, etc. And then primed it with Flex Seal, which also acts as an actual paint for this time around. Everything this weapon has is either black or silver, except for the lights. So once the primer painter was dry, and I had done both sides, I came in with a silver acrylic paint and just painted it onto the silver pieces, doing multiple coats. Used a coat of resin over the entire thing to seal it up, as well as give it more stability, as resin makes everything one cohesive piece. And while the resin was curing, I also removed the tape. There you have it. That is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoy. Happy Halloween, guys!